Hello. If you can hear me, this is the interpreter. I accidentally logged in with the wrong Zoom account, so I am going to leave and come back.
Just gonna get it. Is on? The green light's on. Oh, okay. Okay, great. It is 6:49 PM and the board has returned from executive session. Thank you to our interpreter Dea. Dea, would you please share the interpretation instructions with our participants? And then we can turn on the interpretation function.
Absolutely. Good evening. I will be your interpreter tonight. It is our pleasure to be able to be facilitating interpretation for your meeting, for your event. Simultaneous interpretation is available. If you move your mouse, you will see the pop-up menu at the bottom. In 1 second, once the interpretation function has been enabled, you will see a gridded globe. If you click on that, you will be able to see a pop-up menu with the option for interpretation, and there you can choose the language of your choice. Buenas noches, esta noche vamos a tener interpretación simultánea disponible para todos. En un momento, cuando se haya iniciado la función de interpretación, van a poder ver en su pantalla si mueven su ratón o si ven los 3 puntitos, van a poder ver que van a poder tener la opción de interpretación y ahí dentro van a poder escoger la opción de su idioma preferido y se pondrán las instrucciones de nuevo en el chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next agenda item is our opening celebrations and updates by our superintendent, Dr. Rodriguez. Dr. Rodriguez and our 4th board member are attending remotely, so we're figuring out how to get them patched in.
I heard my name. Did they just call me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. My apologies for not being able to attend in person, but it's for a good reason and it's one of my celebrations. So I'll go ahead and get us started with it. I'm currently in Birmingham, Alabama, along with Director Torres and other CMC leaders, including President Hauser for the Rural Guided Pathways Project via the National Center for Inquiry and Improvement. So today was day 1 of 3, but I'm already very excited about the possibilities for our students via this partnership and our work. Secondly, as I had mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I recently attended my 2-day convening via the Rural Superintendent Academy. And I was also very energized with the timeliness of the content, which included the superintendent CFO relationship, open systems leadership, and portrait of a graduate. And I'm excited to begin to implement some of this fresh learning this spring. Next, Dr. Cole, as many of you know, is leading our comprehensive health and human sexuality curriculum adoption, and it is moving into stakeholder feedback. So I just wanted to invite staff and community members to share feedback via the links we have already shared in our newsletters recently. 4th update, our early childhood team has been preparing for the launch of the Colorado UPK program, and it's in alignment with our spring outreach and application period. So our 5 early childhood programs will be open for application on the universal preschool system in late February in conjunction with the coordinated local outreach and marketing campaign. So just look out for more info from our EC business coordinator, Faride Rodriguez. Also, shout out to our new bilingual communication specialist, Cristina Vargas. She's hit the ground running and recorded our latest episode of Roaring Fork Schools Radio, our podcast, where we talk a little bit about core values, the first 100 days, and some of the next steps for this spring. So just please share and enjoy. Last week at our monthly meeting with district leaders and counselors, Chief Park and the team checked in on CTE pathways and proposed courses for the 23-24 school year. They also engaged in a discussion around ELD course credits as they pertain to district graduation requirements. And I just want to highlight this as it's a part of a larger conversation that we're looking forward to having with stakeholders this spring around Portrait of a Graduate. Also last week, Chief Park led the convening of our school and district instructional leaders for PD focused on fair decision-making processes to embed more equity in key decision-making. As you all hopefully know, our Equity Advisory Council, which is led by Dr. Cole, consisting of students, parents, staff, met last Tuesday to continue discussing the district's progress on our equity initiatives and focus areas. So specifically, this council discussed efforts around hiring and recruitment, social emotional learning, parent engagement, and also participating in AP classes. Earlier this week, I participated in a virtual discussion with Senator Hickenlooper and several firearm safety advocates, including the Colorado Ceasefire, Moms Demand Action, Mental Health Colorado, and the only bartender who survived the Club Q tragedy in Colorado Springs recently. My call to the senator was to increase available funding to school districts. And of course, as you all know, there's a lot of funding out there, often in the forms of grants, but I think it's really important to invest directly into school districts to support the costs associated with mental health and other forms of support. Last Friday, Chiefs Bean, Park, and I met with the Superintendent's Teacher Advisory Council for our monthly First Friday conversation. I just want to say thank you to each of those teachers on that group. We had a great discussion and heard a lot of stories and advice regarding recruitment and retention, specifically to address the costs of living, which I think are probably our largest challenge, but it's right up there with a few others. Next, relatedly, and as previously mentioned through one of these updates a few board meetings ago, we've been exploring opportunities to partner with the Aspen School District as we both seek solutions to address the cost of living in our valley. This week, Chiefs Markham, Gatlin, and I met with the ASD team to discuss some of those opportunities, and nothing really to report here other than we're continuing to work with our partners and neighbors to find creative solutions to this challenge. And then lastly, as you know, we're undergoing the superintendent evaluation process, and I shared this in the recent column. Hopefully folks have had a chance to see those, but one of my 6 personal core values is continuous improvement. And I believe wholeheartedly that I can get better at everything that I do, even the things that I'm already moderately good at, and especially the things that I'm not so good at. This is true about me as a husband, as a father, certainly as a superintendent, but overall as a human being. So we had nearly 700 responses, and I just wanted to thank everyone who took the time out of their day to submit honest, constructive, actionable feedback. Thank you. That concludes my updates and celebrations.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. The next business in order is a presentation from Chief Park on the Learning Acceleration Plan.
Good evening, directors. Hello. So this is after a lot of just months of listening and learning and planning. We're presenting the Learning Acceleration Strategies and Action Plan today, following the work of the District Unified Improvement Plan. While the Acceleration Plan hasn't officially kicked off yet, what we're hoping to get is agreement from you all that these are the right investments to make and to get some of these steps launched to achieve our goals. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of history to help us understand how we got here. In spring of 2022, before I got here, actually, the school leaders prioritized developing comprehensive district MTSS plan, strengthening tier 1 SL instruction across all content areas, and also strengthening the culture and climate in schools. And then in the summer and fall of 2022, as we got some data, we were able to review achievement data. And as you know, we noticed concerning disparities in both achievement and growth between our students. And it's deeply concerning and also not new, as we know, based on historical analysis. And so this prompted an urgent call to action. We prioritized accelerating the learning and achievement of all of our students, but in particular, raising the achievement or closing the achievement disparities between our subgroups. And so then in the fall, in 2022, there was a lot of observation meetings, check-ins, coaching sessions, many discussions, including one-on-one meetings, leadership meetings with our instructional team, our levels teams, our council, content roundtables, equity advisory councils. And with that input, we developed the district UIP and drafted the action plan. We identified the priority areas to address this year, as which we shared in October, and the probable root causes to the challenges. Oh, there we go. As we think about the current state of our student achievement, our change theory is that when we have effective tier 1 instruction at every class, at every grade level, and we have appropriate support for our emerging bilingual students and our students with IEPs, and coaching to help us get there, coaching and PD to help us do it effectively, that will be the key actions that will help us accelerate the learning for our students. And so we believe that with a strong emphasis on the work that happens before and after the classroom is something that's instrumental, and that's with the intellectual prep and data-driven planning, and might include unit and lesson internalization, deep content understanding, data-driven planning, and also the data analysis and response. That, coupled with strong coaching and PD to support folks in getting there, is necessary. And we see this practice in many of our strongest classrooms. The teachers have a really deep knowledge of the content and the necessary level of rigor, as well as the strategies to engage students really authentically in the work. And we need to get to a place where all of our classrooms are doing this. So we came to our major improvement strategies, which were the same ones outlined in our UIP, and are in direct response to the outlined prioritized challenges. And we have really ambitious targets this year, which we have shared. It includes all of our students growing at least from their current proficiency level to the next band. I won't go through each individual goal because you have this, but if we were to move students from their current band, this actually would be the resulting percentage of students at or above benchmark in the specific assessment. And so what you'll see here in Dibble-Zidell, it would be a shift on average from 40.7% overall to 60% overall. For CMAS and ELA across grades, we currently have an average of 32.5 students at or above benchmark. It would shift up to 57%. CMAS math would shift from the average of 23.62% above benchmark to close to 49%. There's math. Oh, there's math. And then for PSAT, EBRW, and math goals, a goal here was that all students would grow at least 20 points beyond their current level and would result in a shift ranging from 38.5% proficient to 74.2% proficient. And then our access goal is that across our schools, we're improving the access MGP or median growth percentile by 5 points in all grades. So in pursuit of achieving these targets, we grounded in research on learning acceleration. And the headlines of this research include attending to the SEL needs of students, creating a sense of belonging, as we know that's something that we have tracked closely in our panorama data, making sure that students have access to grade level assignments and that teachers are teaching grade level content. And then having structures for teacher collaboration was another one that was evident in research on learning acceleration, engaging our families and bringing targeted support. That's the next one. And then the shorter cycles of the responsive assessment so that we can act on the data that we have in a timely manner versus just an excessive focus on standardized assessments. And in this graphic, I try to illustrate those core components that are visible in the middle of this triangle, but really what I want to highlight here is it's a partnership between our district and school leadership, our families, and then ensuring we have a positive school culture and climate. really built on a foundation of strategies, time, resources, people with different roles to address the gaps and really facilitate the recovery. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the specific action steps aligned to the major improvement strategies. And so the first one was to ensure that our students have access to and can authentically engage with grade level content. And so some of the action steps aligned to the goal includes, really working to establish clear vision of excellence and having a really clear picture of what rigorous instruction looks like. Doubling down on our instructional model to improve tier 1 instruction, particularly in literacy and math. Another action step includes auditing schedules, really intentionally creating time for intervention that doesn't supplant tier 1 instruction. And another step here includes piloting a virtual tutoring option, specifically to address a challenge we have with enough personnel capacity to provide additional support for our students. Another major improvement strategy is to leverage coaching as a key development way to strengthen the quality of instruction in every classroom. And so this is an area where we really want to strategically align our FTE. Currently, there's limited coaching capacity at our schools. So even if we, engaged in biweekly regular co-observations with leaders, the cadence could actually be increased from teachers or leaders who might need more support with the current sort of ratios of coaches. It's really hard to do that. Our third major improvement strategy is to develop our district-wide understanding, leadership, and support for MTSS systems and framework. You may or may not be familiar with the Colorado MTSS framework, but it is one that we have referenced and also leverage as we describe the foundational structures that need to be in place. Our SEL support structures, which is one of the principles of learning acceleration. This MTSS strategy includes clarifying our common academic and cultural data that we're gathering, awareness and clarity of all of our available tools and resources, and the process for analyzing and responding to data. Beyond the actual resources, though, we do need to establish the enabling structures for this, including calendars, schedules, development, resources. And then our fourth is to establish and strengthen a school-wide plan to support our emerging bilingual students. As we've named a clear need for more targeted support for the subgroup. This plan outlines some specific steps towards this and includes ongoing intentional PD for teachers and leaders to effectively meet the needs of our emerging bilingual students, increasing collaboration and communication between literacy and ELD to ensure that the rigor of the ELD curriculum meets high expectations. And then also improving the existing structures for CLDE support. And that includes rounding out funding for ELD coaches at our schools. Some of our schools currently have them. Some really need to cobble together plans for that. And so our hope is that we're able to fund all of what we need to take the steps outlined in the plan, but we understand that it's quite a bit of necessary funding and it'll likely be a multi-year endeavor. In the next few slides, you'll see recommendations for additional resources. And I just want to emphasize that what's on these slides is a wish list, but we do think it's feasible with really intentional planning and really prioritizing where we're putting money. And it's, again, likely going to be a multi-budget cycle project to get these funded. So I want to say that again, because it's not an actual list of finalized rules. So I can say it again.
So don't go promote it.
So don't go promote it because it's not a final list. This is just some, and this is not an exhaustive list actually, where in other areas we've identified a need. And so the first thing is, in order to strengthen our tier 1 instruction, we do recommend that we have coaches. And so we want to fund full-time ELD math or literacy coach at each of our schools. And the progress here we've identified is in ways that we can round out the current funding. So it's not like a partial 0.7, 0.9 or something, but really so that there's an FTE available. Just a note, we also currently already have ELD coaches at our elementary schools. Next is a dean of students, and this is primarily to lead the culture and climate work, not simply to be a reactive person, but to be really instrumental in setting clear vision for the school culture, both positive and also some of the responsive components. This role is also somewhat contingent on us on the district team having someone to support that work as well. The third is, as we know, interventionists. It's a strong priority, whether that's in addition to or in replacement of a tutoring vendor, which again is a Band-Aid. Math and literacy interventionists currently exist in several schools, but again, are currently cobbled together where they can and not necessarily a guaranteed role. But it is something where we've had staff and leaders also say, this is a need, but we don't necessarily currently have the people to do it. And finally, just in the work of coordinating the MTSS processes, it's a significant amount of work. We're trying to build a system so we can do it well. We have a long-term goal of having an MTSS coordinator for each school. Long-term, I think eventually we have current, as we know, we have an EARS grant to fund 3, but not necessarily 1 at 3 schools. So we're trying to figure out, would that be a community, across communities, across levels? How do we do that? In terms of proposed or recommendations for additional district staff, and in the vein of differentiated support for schools, having another person to support the coaching and development of principals is something that I think would help us be more strategic and responsive to the different levels of supports that are needed. Second is, when we think about what our current district staff is able to support and wanting to free up our existing directors and facilitators to spend more time coaching in schools, and delivering PD. We hope that some administrative support could help with that, so that our folks that are most experienced in the PD component and the coaching components can spend more time in schools. And I want to name, while we currently already have existing vacancies on our instructional leadership team, an additional scope of work we hope to add is a student experience and culture lead, again, to work directly with our schools and our potential deans of climate, culture, and climate, to really take a focused ownership of that. And then we have some materials, just curriculum assessment materials here. Our ongoing needs always include ensuring we do have high quality materials for Tier 1 instruction and tiered interventions. Along with that, we need to make sure there's appropriate training and professional development, not just one time, but in order to sustain the quality of the program, we do want to sustain it for years beyond. And in support of our data analysis work, we'd like to explore consultant support for 2 things. One, to help us clarify and build our district assessment strategy, and also have an efficient way for leaders and teachers to view, analyze, and respond to their data. That requires us some support. We do have some current systems, including EduClimber, but support with really maximizing the power of EduClimber, and also some support with creating a district dashboard in the spirit of transparent communication with our families, is something that, which is one outlined in part of the learning acceleration principles, but also something I think is time to do, to be just more transparent. And then this isn't necessarily curriculum, but we are piloting virtually delivered high dosage tutoring as one of the possible temporary solutions for intervention, while we build up our capacity and personnel. So that's it. There's a lot of information. I just want to end with, many of the challenges that we've discussed over the past several months includes a number of things, including mindset shifts, using time efficiently, really examining our supportive structures and our enabling conditions in addition to FTE. So I just want to name, there's, while here we may have seen some people and physical resources, we do know and are working on other elements to help really make this happen.
Thank you, Chief Burke. It's now time for board discussion. Each board member will have 2 minutes to share any comments, and we will begin with Director Tyler.
I want to first say thank you for all the forethought and ideas for the learning acceleration plan. I think it sounds like a lot of great work, and I'm excited to see it put into action. My first question is if you can provide a little bit more information on what that targeted support to families might look like?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple of different things. One might be helping families understand the information that is coming from schools. And so it could be help interpreting any kind of reports. It's like a digital score reports or any other assessments that come, even something like CMAS, interpreting that, understanding what it means, understanding the resources that are available at schools, really trying to leverage our Family Resource Center and our family liaisons a little bit more intentionally too. I think we really want to address what some families may feel is a not intentional barrier, but I think being more proactive and understanding what happens at school, how to interpret all the things that are coming, and what it means and what supports are available.
Great. I think that'd be super important. So I'm glad to see that you have that. My next question is, in addition to all these steps and actions that you talked about for supporting emergent bilingual students, have we looked into doing any type of different programming for those students in addition to just the action steps? Have you looked into programming?
Do you mean like curriculum?
Curriculum, yes, and I guess curriculum, but like delivery of instruction.
Yeah.
For the differences of different learners who might need a different instruction than the same learners.
Yeah, we are actually about to engage in this annual CLDE program reviews, which each of the schools, which Amy Fairbanks is leading with principals. That's one. I think I would say that's always a question for me, is the program that we have working, or do we need to make any adjustments? And so it's part of the upcoming program reviews. And I think that's a good question, thinking about the resources we do have and the structures that we have to support our CLDE programming. So in short, yes, in terms of the question.
And then one last thing is just more of a comment, not so much a question, but I know we talked about what we might do first in this acceleration plan and what might be our first steps. I would just like to put on the record that I think could be very important to have the Dean of Student Culture and Climate as a first step towards what can help this plan. I really feel that there's, from the principals I've talked to, a lot of burnout with the amount of time that is being spent on discipline, and that is prohibiting a lot of the coaching that they're wanting to do with their teachers. And I think the academics and discipline are tied together. And I think if we had these deans of student culture that could help in that sense, it could really free up the principals to really help our acceleration of student learning. And I would just like to see that personally at the forefront of changes that we make first.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Ramirez.
I want to echo, great job. Like, I think all of this is great. Thank you guys both for taking the time to be thoughtful with not just the feedback, but how and what we could accomplish with the monies we have. There's a icebreaker in the nonprofit world. If like you had an unlimited amount of funds, what would you accomplish? And to echo Director Tyler's point, I think we all love everything that you guys have imagined, and we hope that as board members we can help you guys accomplish all of these things for our students. I did have a question. In one of these slides, I think it was slide 12 for PSATs, there was a bullet point that said all students grow at least 20 points on PSAT with no difference in growth between subgroups. I don't know that I understand what that's trying to say. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so if I'm looking at our cohort of students, ideally we'd have every student grow at least 20 points. But if we're not hitting 20 points, for example, then I wouldn't want to see that all white students grew 35 and our students of color grew 10. So we'd want to see the same rate of growth there. And so I think it's important to name that explicitly. So we're not just looking at an average, but actual growth between our subgroups.
Do you guys feel it's important to name that on the other tests that our students are taking at the lower levels?
I think not on these slides, but it was outlined specifically in the UIP.
Okay.
Every one of those goals did include that.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted
Can
to
I-
ask,
So sorry, it's a challenging being online, but I just want to add one thing too with the PSAT that's a little bit different than CMAS. For example, CMAS has 5 proficiency bands, and PSAT and SAT have only 3, and the middle band, not quite yet meeting, is actually a very narrow band. And I don't remember off top, Chief Park, if you know or if you recall, but the middle band is actually very narrow. And so
It's about 20 points.
yeah, and so students who grow 20 points that are already within that band or on the cusp of the not meeting band are going to grow. So again, just growing by 20 points, if every student did, it would still be an increase of about 10% more students meeting expectations on PSAT.
thank you. I also wanted to ask about the sense of belonging. Do we know how many of our high schools are doing crew right now?
All of the high schools are doing crew. They're structured differently across the schools, though. Some have it every day and some have it once a week.
So I definitely, so I know in the past, crew was sort of used as a model to create sense of belonging. I had the opportunity, can't remember if it was this week or last week, to meet at the with juniors at the high school at Clement Springs High School. And we talked about the sense of belonging and how they felt it was incredibly invasive to their time, and like they just didn't feel was fruitful. And so I do hope that part of what we do in this work of creating a sense of belonging and really asking students of what that looks like is part of our overall big picture goals, because I do think, and it was expressed to me like fervently, that the high schoolers don't feel it's as productive for them at that level as it is like in middle school.
That crew is not as productive for them, or
Yeah, like they hated it, like literally quoting, "I hate crew." And so, and I truly, like, we've heard some of this feedback before, but it was never something that I ever thought to engage with like a group of students. And I think they had some really valid concerns about like their privacy and the expectations around crew. And so I do think we need to gauge like, where is it effective? And then what does that look like at different stages of our students' academic and social emotional learning in our schools?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Chief Beam, can we get Director Torres?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to still participate while being remote at this conference. I had something actually very similar to Director Ramirez with my question related to the proposed additional staff support in specific to the student experience culture lead. I'm wondering if there was any thought or any consideration for a mentorship type of program with regards to these juniors that have shared with Director Ramirez that crew has not been a beneficial or useful, part of their experience or their time, but rather creating a sense of mentorship that empowers our students to lead others, and not just for our high achieving, high academic students, but rather for all students to be empowered with a leadership type of role for lower, not lower level, but like freshmen or sophomores, or those leadership type of experiences that can really provide a sense of, hey, this is what I didn't have, but I think it would have been great if I did. Kind of almost like the buddy program kind of approach to providing a sense of belonging and a sense of I needed to find a connection with one other person. Just curious if that was something that was considered.
I've noted it. I think that it's done very informally currently, but I do agree there's an opportunity to really clarify and codify what crew looks like at each of our levels and how we can use it as a leverage point to increase the sense of belonging and not only have it in crew, but how that could be an intentional time there.
Yeah, well, and I would add too, it could also tie into this, the consultant support to clarify and build district assessment strategies, because assessment just doesn't have to be curricular assessment and academic assessment, but it can be co-curricular assessment. Are the things we're doing with co-curricular, like a mentorship, like a tutoring, are those things working? Because I think implementing something like this is a piece of it, but also an assessment to make sure it's providing value, would be a great question if we have a consultant, to make sure that that's being evaluated, as being something that's being helpful.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you for all your work on this. So, I think we're all excited by the prospect of this and understand also that it can't all be done at once. I just wanted to specifically touch on. Like throughout this, I noticed that there are a number of things where we're looking at district-wide approaches, district handbooks for SPED, for MTSS, taking off some of the day-to-day decision-making, I would say, because there is a system in place off of our educators. And I appreciate that. It seems like the ultimate goal is to allow our teachers to focus on teaching, to get the coaching that they need, and to free up our principals, our admin to be able to do that. So I just wanted to point that out because I feel like that's something that is really woven throughout that. And I really appreciate that as a board member, seeing that this is going to allow our teachers to do what they're there to do, what they love to do. I wanted to echo Director Tyler's comments about the Dean of Students. I think that of student culture and climate, I think that's incredibly important. And I appreciate having some of this laid out in terms of what you all are recommending first. And I'm interested to know when we can expect kind of the next round of what you're recommending as next steps. Is that going to be in the coming months with budgeting process for next year? Or are we looking at?
Yeah, I think it would come in those next months. I think the most immediate thing for this spring is, funding tutoring right now, the pilot right now. Is it like consultant support for the spring? I think some of the staffing pieces, we'd know a little bit more on what we can afford later on in the budget. Is it April?
Yes, we'll continue to engage the board through work sessions and formal board meetings and providing updates. It's very helpful to have agreement on directions. We can start to narrow choices and make decisions.
So over the next few months out of
Yeah.
budget finalization in May.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I just wanted to think from all of us again, say thank you for all of the work on this Chief Park. This is a massive undertaking. The ambitious goals are, I love seeing them. And I think that the community does as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. We now have 5 minutes for open discussion.
Oh, we're not.
Sorry, I jumped the gun.
Kind of knew there was something, but I couldn't.
I know. For board members, we now have 5 minutes for open discussion. Anyone has anything else to add on this? And Director Torres, feel free to hop in. She's good.
Yeah,
Good.
Go, Natalie. Go. Okay. No, I think, we're all really excited. I think this is such a great pivot for our district to be able to think about using our monies in a new way to really benefit, meet the moment. Like we're coming, even though we're still kind of in the pandemic, but we're, at a turning point. I think we're able to really reassess and think of how can we best support leadership to use our money and use any funding that we can get to help students achieve and to close the achievement gap, the opportunity gap. I would love to also hope in the add to our imaginative, or imagine whatever I'm trying to say, fund that our wish list, that administrators would also get some sort of PD on understanding their budgets and how to use them, allocate money as well. I think that's something that I really would hope that our district becomes an institution that is committed to professional development of not just its teachers, but its staff in all departments and spaces. And so, you know, that's only a small addition that I would hope we would try to find some resources to get all of our administrators, both, you know, assistant and principals, to be able to really know how to work with their budgets.
The only other thing I would like to maybe add to this is that I hope, as we're looking at what these goals are, and especially one of the goals was helping our emerging bilinguals. And as we're looking at how we're going to do this, I really hope we're not going with a one size fits all approach to how we're doing this funding. And I understand, Chief Park, that you were talking about, we will be talking to the CLDE, no, CLDE, thank you, team about what they would do for their ELD instruction. And I think it's important that we have that idea of how they're going to target their ELD instruction. But I think we need to look at how are we targeting those students outside of their ELD instruction in the regular classroom too.
For sure.
And so that when we're in the regular classroom, we're not saying this is best practices. And of course, we want to follow best practices. And I guess that's where my programming question was coming in. And I understand that a lot of this plan is talking to us about best practices, and we always want to do that. But I don't feel like best practices covers it. I think if it's that one size fits all, I think we need to say there are different needs, such as they don't speak the language. And so if you're presenting a program in early literacy being another one of our areas in which we're focusing on, what will early literacy look like outside of ELD for people who are proficient in the language and people who are not proficient in the language. And I just want to make sure that and that's where I guess my programming question comes in. How is it looking different for those different students? Because they do have different needs.
I guess I just add to that sentiment, and I feel like I've expressed it quite a bit this week, that I do think we have two different types of learners. One is the student that, you know, has only a foundation in Spanish language and is coming into our schools, and we need to be able to meet the moment and support those students. And there's also the students who are learning Spanish at home simultaneously. And I think both families have an expectation that if our school district is going to implement some sort of Spanish curriculum, that it's not just in phonics, that it's based on actual, like, we are teaching good quality curriculum that's going to help those students like learn both. And I do think there is a little bit of like you know, putting everybody in the box of you know, that everybody's learning English or is not doing academics well, that goes in a box. But I think there are a lot of Latino parents who want their kids to learn Spanish in our schools, but are really afraid that they're not going to get quality instruction in that area. So I hope we can meet the two.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Park and Chief Markham. We'll
Thank you.
wrap up.
Yeah, I just want to close with, like, this plan is to support all educators in our schools and all of our students too. And it's not only, right, supporting one or the other. It's clearly identifying, hey, here's where we need to put more. But I do want to say this plan is not intended to leave anyone in the dust. Yeah. So yeah. And thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we would welcome members of the public who have signed up to address the board. There are 0 speakers signed up tonight. Members of the public who wish to share their views with the board may also do so in writing at any time. For this evening's public comment, we received 0 written comments. The next business in order is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel, minutes from our previous board meeting, approval of proposed policies GB, GL, IKE, EEAG, EEAEAA, and EEAFB on final reading. Directors, are there any items that you would like to pull off of the consent agenda for a separate discussion and vote? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Call to vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Director Torres.
Thumbs up.
Director Tyler.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Directors, you've just approved the consent agenda. It's now time for board discussion. Each board member will have 2 minutes to share any comments. We will begin with Director Ramirez.
I don't believe I had any comments on any of these that I didn't already echo.
Director Torres,
I found the unmute button. I have no comment at this time.
Director Tyler,
The only comment is I'm curious about how IKE works with the Colorado READ Act and retention, and I guess I would just like to talk to that as we get to the Colorado READ Act.
I have no further comments on these. We now have 5 minutes for discussion.
I'm good.
All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our next item. The next business in order is a presentation from the District Accountability Committee. No.
Well, it's good to be here in front of you all again. Thank you very much.
Thank
My name is Chris Becker. I'm the chairperson of the District Accountability Committee. And let me just make sure I'm hitting the right buttons here. There we go. What's that?
I think I might have done that.
I don't think that my buttons are. Sorry, there we go.
So you just want Kelsey to run it?
Yeah, you just. And just do it to the whole slides up. So the DAC is a parent-driven organization, for anyone who doesn't know, responsible for providing input to the school board. We exist to provide the district's parents a voice in board business, although we also have participation from teachers and the community members and administrators as well. One of our main functions is to provide the school board with budget recommendations. This looks different across different DACs across the state. Here in the Roaring Fork School District, our budget finalizes in May or June later in the year. So we wanted to provide our input as early as we could in order to get our ideas and priorities into the board's hands. We also wanted to link the recommendations with another important DAC function, which is providing feedback on the district's unified improvement plan, which Stacy mentioned earlier. That plan is fantastic. That said, there are recommendations that the board should track through the budget process to ensure that the district is providing the resources to implement its plans. Right. So the first thing that we wanted to cover was funding the performance improvement. The budget and the UIP need to work hand in hand. It was very encouraging to hear the previous presentation in which it seemed like there was some cognizance of the budget items there. After a thorough review, we saw an awful lot of what the example there demonstrates. Professional development support will grow school leaders and teacher knowledge and so on and so forth. Most of our questions on the UIP involved how to pay for these initiatives. And I'm glad that question's already on the board's mind. You know, it's great to know we're on the same page. But what we'd like to see is not necessarily with an eye towards or in principle, like be great if we could do this, pay for this. The board needs to seek meaningful, specific financial commitments. Without these, the goals aren't possible. And we'd like to see budgetary resources that are facilitating improvement, not just placeholding as budgets often do. Money goes to the same place year after year. Nobody really explains what it's going towards. We need to make sure as a collective that it's going towards improving the district's performance. Next, we're on instilling improvement culture here. Schools determine staffing decisions as discussed. Administrators cover that, but the board needs to ask questions for every position that comes up for review, both at the district level, and then also work to instill a culture that's going to trickle down into the school level decisions that asks, are new positions helping our students improve their performance, and how is that doing so? We also expect any new major positions created at the district level. So for example, that MTSS piece that was discussed earlier, to come with explanation as to how that position helps to close performance gaps, obviously, but also how it will interact with current positions, with current existing structures, and not work in operation or in opposition or siloed apart from them. They need to sort of all move in the same direction, all ships sailing in the same way. Professional development, we wanted to pull out two different specific parts of the budget, one being professional development. From our teachers' point of view, this is a huge part of the district improvement plan. Obviously, it's all over the UIP. It's a very important part of the district strategy for increasing performance moving forward. But the budget has not reflected this in the past. Between the 2021-22 actuals and the 22-23 budget, funding for instructional support, which is where staff development and professional development roll up. There was a decrease of 15.7% year over year. At the centralized district level, instructional support was down 7.4% between 2021-22 and 22-23. So there's already been reductions happening. We would ask that the board look at any further reductions with a really close focus on explaining them, and ultimately understand that even an improvement, even an increase in that particular budgets here, speaking about professional development or instructional support, that's coming on the heels of a reduction the previous year. So keep that in mind. A 5% increase might be all we need, but it's not as much as was being funded 2 years previous, if that makes sense. Student health and well-being. Moving the district's performance needle doesn't simply rely on teachers in the classroom. And even though this seems like an obvious point, there's some indication that from a budget point of view anyway, budgetary point of view, this hasn't always been the case. Pupil services are all services directed to providing support to students, nurses, counselors, school psychologists. And these positions are performance-related positions, because without proper supports, our students can't focus on academics. And without that assistance, the assistance positions, support positions, our teachers and administrators can't focus on teaching their students or mentoring those teachers. And in the 21-22 budget, there was $3.51 million allocated in the general fund for pupil services. The following year, it went down by 22%. The board needs to understand why that happened and see get a very good explanation from administration as to what's happening with those positions moving forward. They could be funded from other parts of the budget. Certainly, this is just the general fund that I'm talking about. The designated use fund the designated purpose fund might have some funding for those items, but those are the questions that need to be asked. That's a huge reduction. And ultimately that leads to, go ahead, Kelsey. That leads to an issue with what we all want, which is a resilient educational system. The reductions in instructional support and pupil services point to a larger problem, which is overextension of teachers and administrators, lower budgets for support staff, even as the per employee pay has gone up, point to a reduction in assistants, administrators, and teachers need to focus on education rather than extraneous issues that arise during the day. Kid gets broken leg, mental health emergency, and so on, that pull that administrator that say was going to spend several half-hour blocks that day in classrooms mentoring teachers. Now that administrator has to take care of this issue because there's nobody else in the building that is capable of doing so. Support staff removes items from teacher administrator plates, and any attempted reduction in pupil or teacher assistance should be on the board's radar. And of course, we are talking about professional development, but these ancillary support positions are also incredibly important. The board needs to ask why, if they see reductions there, and if they see increases, again, with the thought in mind that pupil services has already gone down 22% year over year. So if it goes up by 10, is that enough? Is that covering? What does that actually mean? And then finally, I wanted to touch really quickly on replacement of sunsetting funds. Funds come into the district, funds come into the district in all sorts of different ways, but an example that I wanted to mention was Proposition EE, the tobacco tax. That was 1.3% of the budget last year, and that source of funding sunsets this year. It's going to go away. These things happen, new sources of funding come and go, but what is the replacement? What sources of funding are set to end in 23-24, and how does the district plan to cover the shortfalls? And again, I want to finish by just sort of saying that these are all good faith questions. You know, Nathan, Stacy, the administration has proven to be very, very responsive and cognizant of these questions. They just need to be asked. They just need to be covered. And we just want to make sure that the board is doing its due diligence and asking those questions. And that is all I have.
Thank you so much. So we'll now go around and we'll each have 2 minutes to share comments and ask questions. Then we'll close with 5 minutes of discussion. So if you can hang with us through that. And we'll start with Director Ramirez.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chris and team, for coming up with this. This is great. I love it. I want to thank you guys, obviously, for the time that you guys took to even not just come to our meetings, but meet at your meetings and then do the work. It's so appreciated and we value it so much. Thank you for this feedback. I think, like you mentioned, Chris, like things historically were done very differently, and we appreciate that, you know, like you've mentioned, we're very aligned in this moment. We're really trying to make a concerted effort to pivot and meet the moment. I appreciate your guys' thoughtfulness on these questions and on this follow-up. I think it's something that we as a board appreciate and obviously use to further like digest and bring to the team. So just that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Director Torres.
Yes, thank you. So I echo Director Ramirez's statement, and I appreciate this just reminder of things that we want to make sure we ask because there's so much that we're reading and that we're considering, and we don't want to forget anything. And I think the question that was brought up about the, Prop EE funding, I know a lot of times when we know that it's temporary, we put in place programming that is by nature temporary, like what could we do within the next year? What could we do? But then oftentimes we discover that those programs or those interventions are highly successful. So we want to keep them. So obviously reminding ourselves and to be thinking about that as Nathan is presenting the budget. And I even thought about that 2.6 million with with which we were, looking at strategies moving forward. We know that sometimes funding is temporary, but often, and in some cases, it turns out to be something of incredible value. And how do we continue that support, because we don't want to lose the progress that it brings to us. So I think that's a twofold question, right? Is I know that we had temporary funding, but if it wasn't working, it's fine, it sunsets. But if it is working, how do we find funding to make sure that it can continue? So anyway, I just say that because I think that's a question we need to be thinking about. Not always is temporary funding for temporary solutions. If they're highly effective, we need to think about how to keep them. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Director Tyler.
I would like to start by echoing Director Ramirez, what she said about all the work that you have all put in, Chris, and your team. It's evident that it wasn't just a couple minutes, that you've taken your time, you've read through, you've been thoughtful with your discussions. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here, but more just digging into all of these facts that you presented to us and looking ahead, and that gives us some good food for thought. So thank you on that. A couple of things that you said. First of all, for posing the question about how the acceleration plan will be funded. When we were having our previous discussion with Chief Park, I think that was something that came to mind that I let slip, that I wanted to make sure it got brought up. I think it's great, all this plans that we're saying, but again, how is it going to be funded, over what period of time? And those exact questions about how it will be funded, I know is going to be coming in down the time, but I think it's really important for us to keep in mind how that's funded and how we're doing teacher compensation, and where is the line of what is good for students and what is good for morale and what is good for keeping our teachers. And so all of those things are going to need to be balanced in a very delicate dance, I believe. So I think that's important that that is being brought up. And then the second thing that you brought up that I think is an important question is about like the health funding. And you were talking about grants, and grants are sunsetting. And I know at least at some positions, like I know the high school in Roaring Fork had a difficult time filling a position that they had for a health position, because it was sunsetting in a year, and it was going to be hard to hire somebody on some kind of longevity if they knew that it was only going to be for a year. And so I think that's an important thing for us to look at about how we're hiring and what we're putting out there when it is only a year. It's like a grant funding. So thank you for all your work. Thank you.
I echo what all of my colleagues have said. We appreciate the time and effort and energy that has gone into this. The level of detail that you guys have reviewed everything is wonderful. But what I really wanted to share, because it excites me honestly, is that I love the way that this is another opportunity for our community to get involved. So I wanted to thank all of the DAC members for just being a part of the DAC, right? Because this is how the community is involved, can share their voice and share their input on the budget and use this lever to see within our system of education what we want to see as community members that have our kids in these schools and that have been involved. And I think this is a really important first step, the budget making, or the DAC making budget recommendations, because that's how you make change, as you've indicated multiple times throughout your presentation. So I really appreciate that you all were open, honest, as objective as you can be, while recognizing the limitations of the data that you have at your hands. And so I think this is going to be super important for us moving forward. And I hope that we can continue to develop a strong DAC, strong relationship with the board and the district, and continue to work together in this way to move things forward. So really appreciate the time. Thank you for being here. All of your members for committing their time and energy to it. So we have 5 minutes now for open discussion. Anyone has anything else to add? Director Torres, if you have anything, let us know. Okay, we're good. Thank you so much.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
So I definitely want to acknowledge the fact that I think that the district administration is not ignoring these things. Like we didn't put together this presentation as like sort of a gotcha. We know what you're not doing. it seems very clear that the administration is focusing on not only these issues, but how to pay for them, which is super refreshing. And given what's happened with the budget in the past and seeing these in the very recent past and seeing these, these cuts and these reductions, I would anticipate that there's going to be a lot of thought into, building those resilient systems moving forward. And that's really, really great to see. So thank you to Dr. Rodriguez and the administrative team for sort of portraying that mindset. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, the next business in order is discussion on 2 discipline policies. Policies JICH and JIH. Each board member will have 2 minutes to share comments or ask questions. These are on first read. And we will begin with Director Torres. Sorry.
you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I don't know why that was so hard. Dang it, I hate when I'm going first. I do not have questions at this time.
Thank you. Director Tyler.
The only question I have is on the student interviews, interrogations, searches, and arrests part. There was a part with appeals that was scratched out about within 10 days of a search, there can be an appeal. And I'm curious why that was canceled out and where the recourse is for appeals for students.
Looks like there was a CASB recommendation.
It was like on page 3 of that,
Mm-hmm.
of JIH. And is there any, like, where in our policy is there recourse for an appeal by a student?
For seizure of items. Or just for searches?
I was reading it as
The search
general,
decision.
that they have a chance to appeal what has happened, but
Mhm.
maybe it was just under seizure.
I believe it's just under the seizures, but I'd have to look into that to get more of the information, and I can prepare that for the board update.
And I recognize that it was a CASB recommendation, but it just seems like
It's a good question.
there should be some recourse for the student. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put that in.
Director Ramirez.
I am so sorry I was unable to be at policy committee on Monday. I don't even know what day today is. Last week. I obviously, and I appreciate Director Kuhlenberg sharing some of those concerns, obviously around student interrogations and searches, especially when it came to it happening without our parent consent. I feel like one of the things that I flip-flop on a lot is that we sometimes just take CASB recommendations and then they're put in there, but there's like, I would love to know as a director, do we as a team feel that it's aligned to our district and our mission and values? Because to Director Tyler's point, like if we're changing language on our policies here at home and they're not aligned to our values as a district, just based off on CASB, which represents 165 school districts, us just saying it was a recommendation from CASB doesn't suffice for me. And so I really want to make sure that we're being super diligent at like being intentional with our language and our policies, especially for us as directors. Yeah, I think my biggest concerns, which I want to take the time to thank Director Kuhlenberg, were mentioned on Monday. And so I appreciate that we're bringing both of these policies up to make sure that we do go through them as a team and update them to the best of like this moment with everything politically happening as well.
I agree. Thank you.
So I just had JICH, I'm happy with. I think that we incorporated some good changes via policy committee. And so with JIH, Director Ramirez wasn't able to be at policy committee. So we had discussed some changes. And then I had gone back in and made some additional changes. And one, those were around whether or not a student's person could be searched without consent, which it didn't feel right to me that in our policy, we were saying that we could search a student's person without their consent or parental consent. And so those are marked in green within the policy, which is a different color than what we typically see when we're looking at these. And then the other one that I didn't add in that I wanted to bring up was about when we're allowing law enforcement in our schools. So currently, the only requirement is that we have principals or admin check their ID. And I don't know that I agree that we should be in the business of letting law enforcement come in to question students in our schools when there's not like an exigent or emergent or warrant type situation. Just don't know that our schools are the place for that. So I would be in favor of limiting that to when there's an emergency or an exigent circumstance, or that the officers have a warrant. And other than that, I guess I don't see the need to have law enforcement in our schools in situations other than that.
I just actually a clarifying question. Is the recommendation that part that is highlighted to shift to language from discouraged during students' class time to not occurring? Or because the language, except when law enforcement officers have warrant or other court order.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would shift it to something like interrogations and interviews by law enforcement officials shall only be conducted when law enforcement officers have a warrant or other court order or an emergency or other exigent circumstance exists. Something like that. And of course, I want to hear input from fellow board members on those two things. And specifically, I wanted to hear input on whether or how we all felt about student searches of their person being consensual versus non-consensual. Because that was something that I, came up after and I went back in and changed it. So we hadn't had a chance to talk about it as a team. But I do think this is one of those important policies that Director Ramirez pointed out, where the CASB recommendations don't necessarily align with our district and what our values are. And so I do think that it's important that we really think about this. And if, we need another meeting to discuss it, let's add another read-in. We don't have to stick to the schedule.
Okay. I missed, Dr. Rodriguez.
Hey, can you all hear me? So sort of a few quick thoughts, I think, in response to both Director Ramirez and Cullenberg. I think the sentiment there is to limit, both, searching students in particular without their consent and or having law enforcement on campuses. And I just know of a few recent incidents where it was really important for us to confirm that there wasn't a threat or danger to staff and to other students on campus. And in a recent case, the student did consent to the search of their person. But just in the event that they hadn't and that they did have a weapon, for us, it's the times that we're in are really scary, I think, and ensuring the safety of students and staff is our primary objective. I think our first objective. And so I share your sentiment, actually, and also advocating for having the opportunity, of course, with discretion and of course, taking into consideration, not traumatizing students unnecessarily, but just ensuring that we're able to have a safe environment for all students and staff.
I 100% agree with that. And I tried to put language in there that reflected that. So consent is required unless there's a reasonable belief that failure to search the student's person could result in harm to the student or others. I don't know if that encompasses your concerns. But I completely recognize that, and I agree that there needs to be some sort of exception where there's the potential for harm that you can get around the requirement of consent.
Are we at
5 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should start at 5 minutes. Yeah.
So that, I was a little confused by this conversation, because I thought maybe the colors were different and
It's
in mine, it
purple.
was just like a dark red,
Oh, and mine is purple.
or maybe it's a purple, maybe I'm colorblind, but
I know it's green.
it's definitely
Sorry.
not green. I can
Sorry.
be pretty certain of that.
Definitely.
But I thought that wording was what we were approving, and so that's what I didn't understand, that we would be having that. I don't know. For me, the wording that you have here sounds perfect, because I think in the time of emergency, that isn't necessary to check the person, and especially if we think weapons or something of that sort is suspected.
Yeah, and I tried to leave it broad enough, like, I think it needs to be beyond weapons, like, if there's the potential for harm.
Yeah.
Then you should be able to, should be able to search the person.
So I'm
I
in
don't know.
favor of how it is written, and I'm okay with how it's written.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
I agree.
we obviously, thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. I think we all are in agreement that we understand the political climate and everything just happening around safety in our schools. And so we wanted to ensure that we were doing both, not creating a system that would traumatize students and also an unnecessary system that would, maybe, like, heaven forbid, be misused against a student, but also ensuring that, like, we recognize that this is a very scary time for students, and our job as board members is to create safety in our schools. So we wanted to make sure that language reflected that. So I appreciate Director Klulenberg's effort to make sure that was included in the language of this policy.
And then the only other question I would agree with what you're saying in that last part about the law enforcement. I agree with the comments, how it was written. Maybe the only word that's questionable to me is discouraged. Because if we have there is, except when law enforcement officers have a warrant or court order, or when an emergency or other exigent circumstance exists, such interrogations and interviews are discouraged. I mean, if we're saying they're just discouraged, that's not really.
Yeah, and I suggest changing it to.
Because that's saying like,
like,
we
you
don't
could say
really think you
prohibited,
should, but
but-
I guess if you're gonna do it, go ahead. I mean, that sort of defeats the whole.
I think that second part is actually just referring to the time of it versus the reason for it. The first part of the line is saying, having a warrant or court order or emergency or exigent circumstance, that would be the time of reason. And maybe it's actually helpful to have it in a separate sentence, trying not to do it during a student's class time. Versus officers are
Oh,
discouraged.
even if they have the one.
Yes, yes.
I am understanding that. Now I read that differently.
Yeah, and so I read it as they could come in and question students about anything. They don't need to have an emergency or an exigent circumstance or a warrant. We just are,
Yeah, that's what I
we're
read
just
it
saying
as.
that the principal or designee shall make sure they have proper identification before they come into question. And that it's discouraged during class time, except when it's one of those emergent situations. That's the way I read it. Like the current policy. What I would propose is that we only allow interrogations by law enforcement. First, I mean, the paragraph above is if we request it. So if our schools or administrators request that the law enforcement official come in and help with a search or interrogation, then obviously
Yeah.
we want them to come in. But
I put a sample revision in the comment. I don't know if you can see it, but
Hmm.
I I think the first part of that I rewrote to make that more clear.
And I think to Director Tyler and Kuhlenberg's point, the word discouraged is what we're hoping would be changed.
I just don't think that it's necessary, because if we're in an emergent situation or there's a warrant, I think they have immediate access to the student. So I don't think
see.
that we have an
Yeah.
option to discourage the timing.
Got it.
So I think if we're limiting it to only those situations, then the second sentence isn't applicable
So that could just be taken.
in those scenarios.
Such interrogation sentence.
Yeah, I think the timing was more to the non-emergent interrogation of students. Director Torres, do you have anything to add? I don't want to.
No, and I appreciate all the comments because
Oh, man.
Cliffhanger.
Okay. I mean, I think to wrap this one up, Chief Burke, I think if we need another,
Yeah.
we have, I think, 3 weeks until our next board meeting, because of this month being a little wonky, and if we need more time to discuss this, I would say, let's build it in, because
Okay.
I think this is an important one, and I think everyone that was here tonight agrees. Dr. Rodriguez, do you have anything else to add?
No, when we check in for our one-on-ones this month, remind me to give you some of the details of the incidents.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
The next business in order is discussion on 3 budget and procurement policies. Each board member will have 2 minutes to share comments or questions, and we will begin with Director Taylor.
My question that I have on these ones are about DJE. In DJE, I should open it up and see where it says that. It says there was the exceptions to the competitive solicitations part. And I didn't understand the one that said the service that is an exception about the service is a professional service that requires a higher degree of professional skills such as engineering and architectural services, professional management or educational consultant, legal services, medical services, and it keeps going on. But it says, why is that one exempt? Like, I don't understand. I'm maybe missing something but I'm unclear. Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, we're.
I know.
Yeah, I was
know.
waiting for him. I think when we're talking about this policy, we're also talking about practice. This is something that we implemented recently for our hub project. Where it did require a higher level of professional skill that was maybe unique to a particular architecture firm. And so, honestly, Danny, I don't know why those specific fields are limited. I could think of situations where it would be beneficial against those, but I'm not familiar with practice involving those. I am in certain areas, so I'm kind of applying that same logic across other ones. Seems to work, but I don't know if that's a great answer to your question. But we have implemented this before for a couple of those when we needed to. Other ones I'm not so sure.
It seems like it could fall into some of those, like, where within the system, we're already working with this company and that's what we needed to do. But it reads to me like, if we're gonna have an engineer, we only need to have one engineer look at something and we don't have to have competitive bids for the engineers.
Yeah, I think in terms of also like emergencies, like we've had sinkholes at Glenmont Springs High School the last 2 years. That need to be, and they of course come a week before school is gonna start, so. We go with the engineering and services firms that get that done that we know they can get it done rather than shopping it. So I think there's those.
Yeah. I
And
get
given
that.
our community within the valley might not have 3 qualified engineering firms to perform certain work. So I think those are other instances where that might fall into play.
And the emergency one I did see already, like there was already that emergency
Yeah.
clause, so that still didn't I don't understand why that's there when, I don't know, it seems like the explanations have fallen under other
Other ones. Yeah.
things, so. And then I also have a question about the one that says the purchase is otherwise approved by the Board of Education. So like the Board of Education can say, we want this company to do this. And so that's gonna go without getting, I mean, I guess it like, I don't know, it just seems funny that the Board of Education can say, I want Cousin Vinny's. I mean, I don't know, something like to do this and we agree but we're not gonna bid it out. That seems like a funny thing. I would personally think that could be one that could be removed.
I guess when I look at that and I see where you're going with that, it was more around, to me, that's some sort of really unique purchase that didn't fall in any of these other exceptions, that it was kind of I don't know, like that to me was it's kind of a catch-all phrase, I suppose, that you need to get business done. The board says this, we approve this. Yeah.
So I guess my only question is like on those two, are we like, after I make these comments, do we decide they stay, they don't stay? I don't know where we're at. I guess that can come into discussion. Thank you.
Director Ramirez.
It's been funny if we call them Adam. So I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to be here at policy committee. I appreciate your guys' work on this. I want to just echo my sentiments from earlier that I hope moving forward, we're really consistent with like, do these policies align with us and not just putting added for CASB recommendations. Although sometimes I do like the recommendations, I definitely want to make sure that we have thought through of how this will impact our district. I also want to acknowledge that it's been such an interesting experience for me, like seeing some of these policies that I've never seen before. And I know that there was like a policy dump, I don't know, a year ago maybe, where we had access to new policies we hadn't seen. But I think for somebody like me that really cares about how we are fiscally responsible, and also that many times we just go with one company and that I have felt we're not as competitive, like we're not, and I understand like the Valley is a thing and, I understand the situations that we're in, but I do want to encourage us to consider adding wording that says we have to get a minimum of a certain number of bids before we make a final decision. And I'm not sure if that's a practice or if that's a regulation that exists currently, but I do feel like we have to make a concerted effort, even if it means that we extend the time on a project to get competitive bids. And I would encourage us to also try to make a greater commitment of just using these big high rollers that we always like. I know that they typically, we frequent them because we have history with them, but there's so many new companies and organizations in our Valley. And I think we need to make a concerted effort to really like seek them out. And so I just really wanted to express that.
I mean, I think, Jasmine, there's a paragraph at the very bottom that gets to soliciting multiple bids for a specific dollar threshold. And I think, I guess I'd love some clarity around the reaction threshold, because I think we're balancing. We want to be, great stewards of our budgets, but we also want to make sure we're efficient, respond to demand situation. And so, are you thinking a dollar threshold with that, or anytime you make a purchase, we're going to do this?
I think, well, that's a good question. I guess my hope would be that any time that we are getting bids on large projects, that is an expectation. I guess I would love to hear from you guys of, you know, like, for example, I know recently we've like out or contracted out, is it, it's not custodians, is it? No. Is it cleaning services? No. Recently, we talked about something we've contracted out. You know, I wonder if like, we just like openly, I mean, nobody knows what yellow books are anymore, but I'm wondering if like, we just like Googled it and found a company and then said like, we have this job, or if we actually went and got bids. So, you know, like, I think that I would love for it to be applied to multiple scenarios, but I also feel like there should just be an expectation that we're gonna be good stewards and go and find.
And there are dollar thresholds at the top of policy DJE, it's $50,000 and everything will be put out to bid. And then at the bottom, we try and do an informal bidding process for anything that has a unit cost of $10,000.
We don't have Director Torres back, no. Yeah, I mean, I agree, this is an important policy, that's one to consider. We, in policy committee, we talked about balancing the desire to bid everything out, to have competitive bids with that administrative cost and the unique location of our valley. The fact that we don't have many suppliers on a lot of things. So I don't have any like further questions on these past policy committee. I think, you know, Director Tyler, the one that you pointed out related to professional service, that was when we talked about. And I can see that one being important when we're talking about engineering, architecture, like legal services, professional services where you have a relationship, where they have knowledge of the district and the working of the districts. That's going to cost you a lot more if somebody else has to garner that knowledge and expend a bunch of time to get up to that point. I agree that this list, like we could and probably should look at this list a little more in depth. This is unique to our district, and make sure that this is something that the board is in agreement on and happy with. I mean, I think I would be more comfortable with the professional service bullet. Maybe we cut some of the, I don't know, or if we made it CFO and COO, so it had to be a joint decision by more than one party. We're going with those because they're typically high dollar items. Just another level of accountability in there. I can see where that one's concerning.
And I think it, oh, am I all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think too, like, it's back to the practice question. That's a great point. Like, you know, I could count on one hand how many times I'm aware of exceptions to following this process. You know, we mentioned the housing project and some of the services we're getting there for the reasons that you just mentioned. We had previous relationships, we were able to hit the ground running faster, and those turn into real dollar savings. Those are very real, and months on the timeline, which are also savings. And I'm thinking about our bus purchases. We sole source our bus purchases to the company Uber. I really struggle to think of as far as practice in relates to policy, where I mean, we're not looking for ways to find exceptions regularly. It does happen. We also do use consortium pricing too, where we're leveraging pre-bid out contracts and producing off, you know, governmental agreement contracts that are in place for things specifically out of facilities and maintenance. But this doesn't happen much. Like I said, I just kind of want to point that out. And I know I'm constantly asking directors that I work with to get multiple bids to shop around because it's important. And I think your point's really good too around, are there new businesses, are there new companies, are there new local providers that we can leverage and support? We want to make sure we're casting the net to find those as well.
So we'll have 5 minutes for board discussion and then.
So I think I hear having that past experience with these people and that would help them. And I think that's great. There was a crossed out line that talked about that, you know, in the previous, said competitive selection. And it was crossed out that says contribution to program goals, past district experience with the vendor. Like, it seems like that past experience with the vendor, familiarity with projects that already have experience or something like that could fill that first one that I was asking. And say that already, but I don't, I mean. just-
That doesn't,
Where are you?
that paragraph doesn't exempt it from the bidding process, which is what the bulleted points out above do. That just says that you don't have to go with the lowest bid if you have. If you meet some of these things, like, these are reasons that you wouldn't go with the lowest bid, or that you don't have to necessarily go with the lowest bid.
If you go through the bidding process.
Right. That competitive selection, so in terms of selection.
So maybe some kind of vote that says familiarity with a
Yeah,
design process that we have already engaged in that would allow us to hit the road running. I don't know.
I
something.
know this is where policy drafting gets hard, right? 'Cause it's like, how do you?
But to me, I don't know, it just, it was very strange of the, like, blanket statement of those fields.
Yeah.
So that's where I didn't understand.
I mean, and I think to Director Tyler's point, if there was some wording that you guys could bring back to us that maybe could better meet what he's hoping to see. I don't know if this, I mean, we obviously have more time. I did have a question on DJB in regards to the allotments for like the federal micro purchases and how those increased and the federal simplified acquisition. And I know that this says it's updated per CASB. But I'm wondering if is this like a requirement federally to move this number?
This is aligning, what's currently published federally right now. We were consistent with that. So I talked to Octavio about that because, he's really the one that's working within these constraints. And he was actually, relieved to see consistency in our own policy and what the feds are requiring. So we're just adjusting it. Granted, it's a CAGI recommendation, it's aligning it to updated federal regulation also.
I think just for, and so I guess to clarify that when we're talking about like Octavio, are we just talking about your department or is this all departments?
This is really clear, and you can talk about some instructional side, but really we're talking about our federal dollars that are associated with our food program.
Mhm.
And that's really it on the operations side. I think there's some there's things. We get other federal money, but it's almost exclusively used for personnel. And so we have very few purchases that like fall into federal purchasing guidelines. And one of the reasons is because the federal purchasing guidelines are quite cumbersome for the amounts of money we get. So we spend our federal dollars on people. With hired staff on our staff, not contractual services.
You mean like teachers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Teachers, paras, those sorts of things.
And would that be considered? And I guess where my question stems is like, I know that we don't necessarily have to, what is the wording? It's like our policies have to meet I'm trying to think of what the wording is, like
Regulation.
the ceiling.
floor.
Yeah, there you go. I was like, it's the
Yeah.
ceiling. One of those right in the middle. It's the carpet. But I just wanted to make sure that, like, especially for us as board directors, I understand that these purchases are being made or, really are at the discretion of the CFO and the team or, whoever's making the purchase. But I would like to see some sort of, which I see the record keeping, but some sort of accountability measure for us being made aware of it, whether it's in a board update or, some sort of.
You be more specific, be made aware of
I guess like if you guys were to like for example, adding money to a staff, to a teacher position or something being created, that is still something that the board is notified that we're using the money, federal money for this allotment. That is less than,
I don't think that falls under this policy. This is just for procurement.
It's just
of
for
things.
procuring outside services, not hiring staff.
okay, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned teachers and then that's why.
Well, I said that's why we spend money on that federal dollars on teachers, so we don't have to go through cumbersome procurement processes that are more cumbersome than our general fund, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I got super confused and I was like, I just want to know. Okay, thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
All right, the next business in order is action on policy ILBC. Each board member will have 2 minutes to share comments or ask questions. Do I have a motion? This is on second of 3 readings.
I motion that the board approve policy ILBC on early literacy and reading comprehension as presented on second reading.
A second.
Now time for board discussion.
Stacy Park, come on
Board-
now.
We're just saying
Each
it's like the
board member will
lazy
have
Susan of
Yeah.
times.
Director Ramirez will begin with you on this.
I don't have any questions on this.
Director Tyler.
My question pertains to, as I stated earlier with IKE, which we had mentioned that teachers are that retention of a student is an action with significant ramifications and rarely utilized. And it seems like this has to do with possibly having retention. And my question would be, do you know, Chief Park, how many third grade students do we have on a READ Act plan?
I don't know the exact number. I can find that. Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking that is because we have one policy that's saying we should rarely utilize retention. And this is sort of telling us if we have children on a READ Act before passing them on to 4th grade, it's up to like this whole discretion of the superintendent if they should pass on. And I'm not really understanding. I don't know, it seems like they're sort of in conflict with each other a little bit. And if they're not, why would it just be like the superintendent who's then put in the position of saying, oh, I think John should move on and Susie maybe not. And I don't know, it seems a little hard to put that upon the superintendent.
I mean, policy IKE outlines specific expectations that there's body of evidence. It's not for reasons of language. That there's intervention, there's other possible interventions listed. What I can tell you is that historically, there's not been in kindergarten through 8th grade retained. There's been some in the high schools and then one from preschool to kindergarten. And so in terms of practice, I think, what we discussed is don't think either is right to say we're just going to pass kids on, but I don't think retaining, massive, many children is right either, but we do need to appropriately prepare them.
Right. I hear that. I'm just questioning the line. There's that one line that says beginning in the 2016-17 school year, if a decision is made to promote a student to 4th grade, even though the student continues to be identified as a student with a significant reading deficiency,
Mhm.
the superintendent or superintendent's designee will make the final decision regarding whether the student is promoted or retained.
Right.
So like how much information is the superintendent going to have on that student other than maybe the report that's put out there? And should there be some other?
It would be everything that's actually outlined in IKE, which is the retention, promotion, retention, and acceleration of students policy. And so, whether it's the grades, multiple assessment scores, students on the READ plan is informed by, DIBELS or a DIBELS assessment. For here, it's a READ Act approved assessment, but overall retention would include more than just like reading, for example, or the decision on that. So if you're thinking about, the grading periods, what are the grades that the student has? What are the interventions that have been tried? How are we monitoring their progress? What evidence do we have that the evidence, that the student did receive interventions? Would be there, wouldn't be just based on like one score, for example.
So is that part where that says the superintendent will make the final decision? Is that in case there was like a disagreement with the parent, or whether or not like the student was shown to be retained or not, or like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
where-
Yes.
Yeah.
Because above that, if you look at the two paragraphs above that, the initial conversations, consultation with the student, the parent guardian, teacher, other appropriate school personnel. Right, if there's a sort of disagreement on the decision.
And it might be helpful to clarify this perhaps in a regulation, but in general, the designee is the principal at each of the schools. So again, unless there's some sort of conversation that needs to happen to verify or to challenge a decision that they've made, that's sort of when I imagine I would come into the picture, but we would trust that the principals are making those decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Director Tyler, I just looked at the READ Act. And so under the READ Act, it puts the responsibility for making that decision on a local education provider. And it defines that as a school district, board of cooperative services, district charter school, or an institute charter school. And so I guess the question is, in order to be in alignment with the law, it has to be on a local education provider. And we're defining that as the superintendent within
Okay.
our policy.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
I don't have anything further on policy. Can we call to vote? We need to vote on this one. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Chief Park. Can we take a quick bio break? Thanks. We'll be back in 5 minutes, 8:40. All right. It is 8:41 and we are back. The next business in order is action on the proposed proclamation for Black and African American History Month. Each board member will have 2 minutes to share comments or ask questions. Is there a motion?
I move that the board approve the proclamation honoring Black and African American History Month as presented.
I second this motion.
It's now time for board discussion. And we'll begin with Director Ramirez.
I guess I just want to share that recently I came across a article that I had written prior to becoming a board member, and I was reflecting on the fact that, you know, first of all, it's been 4 years, guys, thanks to the team. And more than anything, just really feeling so much gratitude for our team, for our superintendent, for us to be able to have opportunities for board members like myself to bring forth proclamations that I truly feel and hope not just make an impact on our school community, our district, but most importantly for our students. And, you know, in writing this and in reflecting so much of our community and students in our schools, my own kids, and you know, just where I'm at as a board member today, I just wanted to take the time to honor and also say, you know, all of the things in honor, respect, gratitude to Black men and women in our community that exists now, our students that are in our schools now, and all of the history makers and American heroes who have forged a path for people of color to be able to be in roles like I am today. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Director Tyler?
I guess I would echo that sentiment. I think when I think of Black African American history, I think it sort of like brings me to the thought of civil rights. And when we talk about civil rights, it pretty much is about Black and African American history, and that's where it's brought up. And with our district of having so many people of color in our district as students, I think that this has been the sort of pioneering moment for what our district is now of the civil rights movement. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge, and especially looking at who our population is, what an important step and moment the whole civil rights was for our population. And I would like to say I especially appreciate the whereas in our proclamation that says, we believe our diversity is a strength where our students' diverse ethnicities and cultures create rich educational and cultural experiences for the entire school community. I think that's super important. So I appreciate this.
Director Ramirez, thank you for spearheading this and for bringing it up. I think that it is the line that Director Tyler just pointed out is one that I wanted to also hone in on, because I think it's super important for us to encourage educators in our district to not just celebrate diversity of skin color, but diversity of ethnicities and cultures. And, you know, Dr. Rodriguez put that in one of his columns this fall about really celebrating who everyone is as an individual, and moving away from this idea of not seeing skin color, to celebrating it, to honoring it, to inviting conversations about who someone is, the whole person, I think is super important. And I'm happy that we're doing this as a board. I think it's important. And I really appreciate you bringing it up and getting it on the agenda for this meeting. So thank you. Great. So let's vote and then, yeah.
Aye.
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 Director Ramirez, did you read the proclamation?
And I want to say thank you to Kelsey more than anything too for all her help. The Board of Education proclamation honoring Black and African American History Month. Whereas the month of February is set aside each year to honor, celebrate, and remember the struggles, achievements, sacrifices, and contributions Black and African Americans made on behalf of the United States of America and the world. And whereas the recognition of Black and African American History Month is an opportune time to salute the achievements of the past, gain insight into the present, inspire progress for the future, and teach our students about American heroes of color. And whereas we celebrate the diversity of Black and African American people in the Roaring Fork School District, our nation, and the Black diaspora, whether they self-identify as African, African American, Afro-Latino, Afro-Caribbean, or Black. And whereas in educating the children in the Roaring Fork schools, it is appropriate that all children learn about, reflect upon, and cherish the contributions that Black and African Americans, both past and present, have made to our nation in the realms of the arts, business, civil rights, education, entertainment, military, music, law, literature, politics, religion, science, and much more. And whereas we believe our diversity is a strength, where our students' diverse ethnicities and cultures create rich educational and cultural experiences for the entire school community. And whereas we remain committed to serving, inspiring, and promoting student success while improving student equity and access to high quality education. Now therefore it be it proclaimed that the Roaring Fork School Board of Directors do hereby proclaim February to be Black and African American History Month in the Roaring Fork schools, and strongly encourage staff and community to reflect on the rich history and teaching of the Black and African Americans and bear witness to the progress and achievements they have made in our country.
Thank you. The next business in order is board reports and comments. Begin with Director Taylor.
So my IBB committee has been meeting on trying to figure out how we can look at teacher time and early release Wednesdays, and we're coming to some ideas and have been gathering information and coming up with ways in which we can report this out to the rest of the IBB team. That will be happening on the 15th of March and hopefully February. Thank you. And hopefully with that feedback, we can come back with some more specifics of how we're planning to tackle early release Wednesdays and PD in general, and how we can look at lessening burdens for teacher time. And so that's one thing that I've been engaged in. And another is we continue with Chief Gatlin in the housing, trying to figure out how we can get our housing project moving forward. And we're at the point where we're starting to be close to getting subs in and getting what it's going to cost. And we're trying to see if we're remaining close to target for what it might cost. And we've run into a little bit of a hiccup in how we're trying to get it approved, because our Town of Carbondale's planner hasn't been hired that would be approving this for us. And we were hoping to go through the Town of Carbondale instead of having to go through the state, which has a long queue. And it seems like now we're going to be having to go through the state. And so it's not a terrible setback, but it's definitely could be pushing us back maybe a month or two. Does that seem what might be happening? But in general, we seem to be moving forward with good progress and ready to get going, hopefully in summertime.
So, thank you. Director Ramirez.
I got to visit my home. Is it considered my homeschool? Yeah, my homeschool. Lone Springs High School. Go Demons. And meet with our juniors. Thank you to Mr. Freeman for inviting me. It was like, I love being with students. Like, I really appreciated that opportunity. I hope that our schools like provide us as directors the opportunity to hear from our most valuable stakeholder as often as possible. And like I mentioned, you know, we spoke about belonging. And I was like really surprised to hear their brutal honesty around crew. But I appreciated it so much because it put faces to a complaint that I feel like many of us have heard when it comes to crew and really, you know, they want to feel the sense of belonging, but they also have a lot of concerns of how that's being implemented at the high school level. And they're like teenagers, which like I was reminded when I was in the room, I was like, wow, these kids are like full. But I want to give those juniors a shout out. They like were far more academically like, you know, they were like counting points on their GPA for, you know, but becoming valedictorians. It was so cool. Like I definitely was a kid in high school and appreciated like their commitment to be like, I want to be valedictorian. And it was a really amazing experience for me. I also want to give a shout out to the PTA at GSES. I got to meet with their fab this week. Love to see all of the amazing things they're doing to fundraise. And all of the cool creative ways that they're engaging with families and I just really appreciated being able to meet with my schools and engage with them in that way. So I really love us being able to have our schools.
I met with my IPB committee last week and we were working around still staff leave. So personal days, sick days, figuring out those allocations. And then this week we have an additional meeting on Friday afternoon to discuss, you know, the role of IBB, our policy around IBB, and engage in some of those discussions with the hopes that we have something to bring back on each of our assigned topics next week at the update check-in. So it's been a really good process and it's been a thoughtful process. And, you know, I really appreciate the work of the teachers that are involved because they move us forward and they keep us on task and keep things going. So it's been good and engaging. I also started my SVP program with our first group on Monday, which was great. I got to meet school board members from around the country and hear about the struggles that they have and the issues that they're facing and just connect with other people that are in similar situations. So that was really great. And I'm really thankful to be a part of the program. And what else? Yeah, I've been engaged with my homeschool. Shout out to Basalt Elementary School PEG. They just installed today a book vending machine outside of their library. It's pretty amazing. It's empty right now. My kids were very excited to press all the buttons, even though it's not plugged in. But I think it'll be really, really great. And also pretty thankful to have those relationships because I've been getting updates from the administrators and it's a great point of contact. So that's been good. We don't have Dr. Torres stuff. So we'll now move on to our final agenda item, appreciations. Begin again with you, Director Tyler.
Okay, my appreciations are sort of where you all talked about your board roles, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Kendall Riley and Amy Brockman at CRES and Cora Carballera and Megan Vallardo at Roaring Fork High School. I really just appreciated the conversations that I had with them. I wanted to shout out that they are seen and appreciated for all the many roles and hats that they wear within their daily routines, and that I understand how overwhelming that job can be, and there's a never-ending amount of work to do. And so just to know that they are recognized and seen, and that I'm hoping that I can represent their needs in my position, and to thank them for all the work that they do. And I hope to have that same meeting with CMS.
Director Ramirez.
I guess I'd like to appreciate our team, our executive team and our superintendent and our administrators who I think as we've transitioned and just thinking really about like our acceleration plan and I really appreciate that all of us have really jumped on board to say like we're gonna be committed to student success and centering student outcomes and student social emotional learning and all of the things. And adjusting, I really appreciate that. I've seen it in the schools, I've seen it with our team, I've seen it like, from the top down, and I appreciate that so much, not just as a parent, but as a board member, that if like for me as a participant in this, like it feels like there's progress, and I appreciate that so much from all of you. And I wish Nathan was here because I feel like, like even with our budget, like it has been such a different experience to engage with the budget this year. So thank you guys.
I have a couple. First, I wanted to again appreciate the DAC and the work that they've done. At this time last year, there was not a DAC in existence. So they've really, pulled themselves together and to be able to come up and present some specific recommendations and really engage with the budget and with the UIP and with each other. I just think, like I said earlier, it's such a great opportunity for us as a board to hear more community voice and have some specific focused community members that are working on the same things that we are. And I just think having more opinions is helpful, more things to consider, keeps us on our toes and make sure that we're doing what we should be doing. So I'm super appreciative of all the work that they've done, because I know that they've had struggles and, been trying to hit their stride, and they're still coming through and doing what they're intended to do. So I'm very appreciative of that and their time. The other shout out that I wanted to give this week was for our transportation and grounds crews, because it snowed, I think, like every single day. Like, at least in Basalt, every morning I feel like I wake up and I'm like, what's going on? And just the work that goes into, seeing the plow trucks come through and everything's clear and everything's good, and the nice little walk like a penguin signs are out, and the sidewalks are salted, and everybody's getting where they need to get safely. So I know they've been working really hard in the past couple of weeks, and I wanted to give a specific shout out to them. So thank you. All right. There's no further business and no objection. The meeting will be adjourned. It is 8:59 p.m.
Thanks for your
Thank
staying power,
you.
everybody. We got back within 20 minutes.